So next, I'd like to just introduce our next panel moderator, which is Catherine Jeffrey. And Catherine is the CEO of KJ Consulting, and she's leading a very hot topic that we have found over the course of time when we have been talking about these topics of generational differences, and she's going to be able to lead this discussion in a very well-structured way. So Catherine.
All right, thanks for joining us on the panel on generational differences, leading well through a time of crisis. I'm excited to have this incredible group of women together who are making a difference every day by creating space for people to thrive. They've navigated this generational shift well, and they continue to build bridges for their employees to flourish no matter what generation they find themselves in. So for the panel today, I'm going to guide us through a series of questions around some of the most pressing issues in today's world. And I feel confident that everyone will walk away with some true nuggets of wisdom, as well as ideas for implementation in your own organization. So we're going to start by having each panelist introduce themselves by stating their name and just what their role is in their company, what generation they're part of, because it's important to understand the perspective they're coming from. And then I thought we'd start off with a strength that they believe their generation brings to the workforce.
Catherine, did you want me to lead off then?
Yes, that'd be great, Diane.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Diane Velsick. I am the Chief HR Officer for Marmon Holdings, which is a $9 billion holding company of about 150 manufacturing companies. And I've been in HR for about 36 years. I am a boomer, and I think one of the strengths that boomers bring is a ton of experience and a desire to teach and mentor.
I can go next. I'm Kiki Chorus. You can hear me, right? Okay, great. I'm Kiki Chorus. I'm an HR manager at Duracell. I am a proud millennial. And I think that one of the strengths that millennials bring into the workforce are we're always looking to challenge things, and we're very inquisitive. So I think that that's one strength that we bring to organizations. So we're always looking to make things better and simpler.
I can hop in. This is Liz Walker. I am the strategic claims and client engagement leader for Marsh. Marsh is a global insurance brokerage and risk management firm. I've been an attorney by trade for most of my career, and then more recently in kind of the last, I guess, 5 years or so, moved into the risk management space. I am a Gen Xer, and I believe that one of the strengths that my generation brings is entrepreneurialism. Which is my cheating way of actually combining two characteristics of kind of independence and kind of a risk consciousness, which I think kind of go into entrepreneurialism. You know, I think we were kind of the first latchkey kids, and so we were very, very conscious of our safety and our time and our autonomy. So I think that's something we bring.
And I'm Tracy Lampert. I am Head of Employee Experience and Culture at Zurich in North America, which for those of you not familiar with Zurich, we are an insurance company. And I am a proud Gen Xer. And just as Liz was saying about the latchkey kids, I can absolutely relate to that. I think some of the strengths that our generation brings is being independent, being adaptable, and loyalty. And I certainly, those are things that I feel I bring to the table. I've been with Zurich for 25 years, so in a host of different roles, but most recently now in HR. So I'm very much looking forward to the discussion today.
Awesome, thank you all. So we thought, but since each of them shared their generation, that we would do a quick poll and have everyone let us know the different generations that are, on the call. So it should have just come up on your screen. So if you'll go ahead. And fill out the poll. All right, there we go. So we've got majority millennials, and then we've got a lot of Xers, boomers, and even some Zers. So that's awesome. I think that all of you will walk away with some knowledge, maybe about your own generation and also about those that are around you. So with 5 generations in the workforce today, this is a very unique time in history. The first time that's happened. We know that there's a lot of tension going around the workplace. In fact, research has found that the tension between the boomers and the millennials is decreasing productivity by 12%. So to our panelists, what is one of the biggest intergenerational stresses that you experience or that you have witnessed in the workplace, or even, you know, we've gone remotely for some companies, you know, what are you seeing?
So, Catherine, I'll jump in with this one. You know, our culture by nature is one that is very traditional. It's a formal environment, and we have basically a lot of boomers and a lot of millennials, and we have just a handful of Gen Xers so far. And when this whole, you know, about 8 months ago, the whole idea of a work from home kind of a setup was unthinkable in Marmon's culture. It just would never have happened, because our baby boomers and our senior leaders in particular believe that work from home is just really a euphemism for I'm really goofing off and every once in a while I'll check email. So that was the mindset prior to the forced great experiment that we all find ourselves in as a result of the pandemic. And it's been super interesting to me to see how before the pandemic, our millennials were pushing for more flexibility in a work arrangement to no avail. The boomers were not hearing anything of it. And now with the pandemic being forced into this remote work situation, what we find is that the boomers and the Xers are loving it. And it's our millennials who are like, hey, I miss having, you know, the exposure to people to help me with my career. I miss the social interaction. How am I ever going to learn? How am I ever going to get ahead? And so it's kind of like the tables have flipped a little bit. But the bottom line to all of this, for at least Marmon's experience, is that our boomers have really learned very directly and unequivocally that work from home works, that people have done really terrifically well, that people can be trusted to do what they need to do. And in fact, the productivity has gone up as a result of having this work from home situation. So it's just, it's been a very interesting time at Marmon.
Yeah, thank you.
And here I can hop in, Catherine. You know, I think my most recent position, you know, I just came to Marsh, you know, a few months ago, but my prior company, I would say that the 2 generations most represented were probably Gen Xers, some boomers, and then millennials, and really heavy millennial in the workforce. And I think from a tension perspective, there seemed to be a tension around this perception of work, or a perception of entitlement. And I think Gen Xers, you know, like I was saying, we consider ourselves flexible and open, independent, you know, kind of hallmarks of our generation. And in being so conscious about making sure our work doesn't overtake our personal lives. And millennials kind of have a focus on life and value, you know, classically, I think, and that work should fit into that and support that and be an integral part of that. And you know, they have a keen focus on feeling comfortable and safe at work. You know, it's like mandatory. And I think that probably I can tell a story, I think, that probably best like personifies this tension. And you know, there was a group of us in my last place, largely Gen Xers, a boomer maybe, and a millennial, chatting at work. And the millennial was letting us know that she had to leave work early that day. When we asked her why, she said she had purchased spinach that had gone bad the day before. It went back really, really quickly. And so she needed to return it to Mariano's. You know, and we're like, that's interesting. That's something we would do on our own time, you know? And she was kind of classically known for this. So I don't, some of these things were not an all millennial thing, but it was just, it caused those conversations, you know, where the group of kind of Gen Xers later were like, would you have ever done that? I would never do that. Certainly wouldn't tell anybody. That's why I was leaving work. But the funny thing is, she was a wonderful employee. She was excellent. She got her work done. I'm sure that she logged on later when all of us were, like with our kids, she was back to work. But it was just a different way of how and when you work and the flexibility you expect to have. And I think with Gen Xers, like, we've considered ourselves so open and flexible and independent. And then here comes this other generation behind us that's like that to the nth degree. And it makes us uncomfortable. We're like, well, hold on. Now I think you're entitled, but I always think of that, and it still makes me giggle, the spinach story. But at the same time, she was incredibly effective at her job as well. So.
Excellent. Thanks, Liz.
I can jump in too. I think that, and I apologize, I've been having issues with my camera. So you're seeing me move it around. I've gotten some help with some of my other generations, but I had a little problem with my setup. It's interesting thinking about the different generations. And I think during this time in particular, we've absolutely seen employees that are the younger generation helping people with technology that maybe they haven't leaned into the technology in the same way. And just, I think, some of that mentoring, helping, etc., has been very, very positive. It's interesting for Zurich, we've had flexible working and what we call flex work in place for a number of years. We had probably about 60% of our employees utilizing flexible work schedules prior to COVID. And I would say there was probably an unwritten rule that with some teams that was, it's available and it's acceptable, and other teams it was not so acceptable. And, I do think some of that is related to the generations and how people are accustomed to working. Certainly with everything that's occurred now, we're working in a fully remote environment. The world is or has. And so I think that many of those situations have really started to change. And I think people are having an appreciation for what, how people are successful in one environment and what they need to do. So I think that's been all very positive.
I can chime in a little bit as well. So for our organization, prior to COVID, we had a similar background to what Diane alluded to over at Marmon, where the culture was very, if you're not in the office, then you're not really doing your job. We have to have our eyes on you. And we didn't really have a whole work from home. And as an organization, we really wanted to shift this and do the work from anywhere from probably before COVID. And then COVID happened, and it was this great opportunity for us to go through with the plans that we had of working from anywhere. So we've gone to no real work from home to now in the future, pretty much forever. As long as you're working for the organization, you're going to be working from anywhere, working remote, unless you're working in one of our manufacturing sites. And so it's been really interesting to see the different generations adapt to this new flexibility. Even I find myself like, I'm a millennial. I miss I always thought that I would have loved the work flexibility. I thought it was going to be this fantastic thing. And I've noticed that I really miss the interactions I've had with some of my colleagues in the office. I really miss like the incidental learnings that I had being in the office. And I think that that's true amongst some of my colleagues that are similar generation as mine. But one thing that I've noticed with some of our other generations, where before going into this work from anywhere, they managed more on hours and less on performance. They've completely done the shift of now they're managing on performance and less of hours in the seat. So they've really done a really good job as managers into assessing performance, not like, well, you're sitting in front of your computer for 8 hours, they could be playing solitaire, for example. So it's been really interesting to see this shift. But I do find that some of our generations are acting opposite than I would have anticipated prior to this whole being forced in working from anywhere. So it's been a really exciting time. I say nothing like working in HR during a pandemic. I love it though, because every day I'm learning something new, which I said before, I'm a millennial, I love to learn. So this has been a really great experience so far.
Awesome. So lots of transition occurring right now in our work worlds. And I think one of the, because I know some of you actually go into the office, you're on some kind of hybrid or rotating schedule. So what kind of issues are you seeing across the generations when it comes to compliance with COVID-19 precautions? And then how are you addressing these issues?
You know, for us at Marmon, what we have found is an amazing compliance level, and we are very geographically dispersed. So we are a global company. We have 23,000 people around the world, and it doesn't seem to matter if you're in a manufacturing site in the South, if you're in a manufacturing site in the Northwest, if you're in Italy, if you're in China. The compliance has been amazing, and I can only attribute that to two things: very clear communications on what's expected, and then complete enforcement by the management. You know, that there's no exceptions allowed, and people have been very swift to take action if there is someone who is out of compliance. As well as a heart towards accommodation. So if there is someone who has trouble wearing a mask because of some underlying condition, then other alternatives are sought for that person. So compliance has been, you know, of all the many things we can disagree with in the world today, with all the vitriol in the world, compliance in our work sites has been really high, and that's been one very comforting point of all of this.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I can say, Catherine, no, with my most recent company and with Marsh, everyone's still largely at home. You know, so we don't really have people coming in. There's a couple Marsh offices that are open, but in general, I think it's a handful of people. And so from what I understand, compliance is really great because nobody's coming in yet. So I don't have a really good complete picture to give you there, but I can say on a personal level, this is something, you know, I kind of shared, Catherine, with you earlier, that I can share here is from a generational perspective, I've noticed differences in my personal life. You know, I think it's kind of illustrated by my parents and my in-laws. Largely, you know, they're boomers in you know, both sets, and I think it's important to note that politically they're on different sides of the fence. And so the way that they talk about the pandemic is a little bit different. You know, I think my in-laws tend to kind of downplay it a little more. My parents kind of talk about the seriousness and the death toll. But what I find interesting is that they both act very, very similarly. So regardless of how they talk about it, both are really quick to like rip those masks off as soon as they possibly can. You know, they move in for hugs, sometimes inappropriately when unmasked with small children. You know, they kind of forget about social distancing when they're with their friends and their family and need to be reminded. And there's just kind of this feeling you get of like, life is too short. I want to enjoy my friends and my family, and that's what's really driving me, what's really important that I'm getting from them. And I know this is not across the board. Whereas, you know, kind of the Gen Xers and the millennials, I know, you know, my friends and family are much more conservative, really. It just seems like we're kind of taking our time. We're keeping those masks on longer. We're not getting together as often. If we do, it's definitely outside. There's not too many. So it's just interesting to note on a personal level, it's been generationally different in my experience.
Yeah, that's great.
I would agree with you as well. I'd echo everything that Liz said. I feel a lot of the colleagues that I have, so I'm an HR manager, and a lot of my colleagues are, they're in different generations than I am. They are a little bit older than I am, and they've started calling me Mom Kiki because I'm always really concerned if they want to like go to dinner together or come together in groups. And I find that like Liz said, my friends and I are much more conservative as opposed to some other generations. Like I think about my mom and even my grandfather. He wanted to go get a haircut, and I was like, absolutely not. Who needs a haircut right now? Like the health is too important. So it's been really, really interesting. But I think it's because, like what Liz said, they've gone through all of these different things, and this is probably the first big thing to happen, like in our generation, where we're very hypersensitive to the situation. So it's been really interesting.
Oh,
he hasn't gotten a haircut yet.
I was just gonna ask.
And I can add in too. So for one of the things that we've done, is, you know, just in terms of understanding for our employees, what are the issues that they're facing, is we've done a number of checkpoint surveys. So actually since March, we've done 3 different checkpoint surveys, and really along the lines of what are the challenges you're facing, how can we help you as an organization type thing. And interestingly enough, and not surprising, is one of the top things is people wanting to stay safe from the virus, regardless of the generation. And the other theme that has come through very loud and clear is around well-being. And so in particular, emotional well-being and physical well-being. And then when you start really talking with people and understanding what the feedback is, it actually then starts to diverge a little bit. So while it's about well-being, millennials in general, these are very general statements, but oftentimes they're balancing childcare, or they have school-age children at home, some of the Gen Xers as well. Whereas some of our baby boomers, maybe they're now thinking about, they're stressed out because they had plans for retirement, and they're starting to think about things a little bit differently. So for one of the things that we're really trying to take a look at is, while we've got some themes, it's really about that individual experience, and some of the generational elements are coming through there. So we've been customizing and really trying to support people more individually, and starting to empower employees and help themselves too. So very interesting.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Tracy. Now, some of you have already touched on this, but what kind of issues are you seeing from the different generations when it comes to working remotely?
I can touch a little bit on this. So like Tracy said, at Duracell, we've also done pulse surveys to see how our employees are doing throughout this whole experience and with the pandemic. And one of the resounding themes that we've seen is that a lot of our employees, no matter what their generations, they're experiencing a high level of isolation. So we've created different webinars for our employees for their emotional well-being, tips on how to combat the isolation throughout this time. So as an organization, we've tried to support our employees as best we can, and letting them know that their health and well-being is of utmost importance to us, because the mental toll that this could really place on people is very, very high. Other things that we're seeing with the different generations around the technology piece. So we've also done some various trainings and things like that, because during COVID as well, we also rolled out new technology. So rolling out new technology to a remote workforce has also been interesting. So having that transition over to Teams, we've had to do various trainings for our employees in order for them to effectively collaborate at home. So just through pulse surveys and the feedback that we've been receiving, we've tailored our approach.
And like Duracell, Marmon has also done, it wasn't a special effort, because we do an annual engagement survey, and it just happened to be that the timing fell in the midst of our great experiment. So in July, we went forward with our normal engagement survey company-wide, and shockingly, we went up in every category. So the favorability ratings improved in this, but we had a lot of feedback that pointed us towards hosting some focus groups. And so we're in the midst of getting the feedback from those focus groups, and I've had benefit of some early returns of those focus groups. And one of the things that has really stuck out as a theme that is emerging in these focus groups is that I think what we need to do is consider really identifying what norms and etiquette is for this remote work situation. For example, there are some of our people who are sending emails and doing work at 2:30 in the morning. Now, my guess is that they are not slaving away, hunched over their computer from 6 o'clock in the morning until 2:30 the next morning. My guess is that they're probably dealing with online learning and childcare issues, and maybe some elder care issues that are taking them away from the normal business hours. And then what are they doing? But they're sneaking in some time to catch up in what seem to be, night owl hours. But then when a subordinate gets an email at 2:30 in the morning, they're like, holy crap, what's my boss doing awake at 2:30 in the morning? That means I must need to work the same kind of hours. And, you know, people start feeling guilty about that. So I think what we're going to do to start addressing some of this is really talk through and have each work team set their own norms and expectations so that there aren't made up stories, because all of us are brilliant at filling in the blank, usually with a bunch of junk, when we haven't been specifically articulating what our thoughts and expectations are. So the focus groups have been really helpful to us to try to surface those issues and make sure that we kind of bring them out in the open and talk very directly within each work team about what's expected, what are the norms and etiquettes.
Excellent, thank you all. And I just read a stat the other day, Diane, to your point about increased favorability, that 25% of workers in America are feeling more loyal towards their company as a result of the pandemic and how companies are handling it. So, I mean, that's a kind of a silver lining, right? We all want that in today's world.
It's huge because Marvin has always had this this reputation with its people that we were all about the business. I was kind of laughing a little bit because Kiki was talking about how Duracell has been attending to the emotional well-being of their people. That is so not within the Marmon culture. We are like all about very, you know, we're hard hitting, you know, manufacturing tough guys, right? We don't talk about emotional well-being, but the response of the company throughout this pandemic has blown people away because the care and concern of the company trumping everything else has really been quite an eye-opener, and it's given Marmon a more human dimension than I think the company has ever enjoyed in the past.
That's awesome. Very well said. So one of the other big topics right now is the civil unrest that we are experiencing in our country. So how has your company dealt with this current environment? Have you made public statements or commitments? And how are you addressing employee concerns on this subject? Because as we all know, this is hitting different generations in different ways. So yeah, can some of you talk about how you're going about this incredibly important topic?
Yeah, I can jump in here. You know, I think Marsh was actually very quick to make a public statement, you know, in support of racial justice. You know, kind of at the start of all this. Well, the start, that's a loaded word. Just in the past few months, you know what I mean. But even more than that, which I think is even more important, is that there's been a lot of work internally with employees to not assume that we know what all employees need or want, but a real exploration to figure out what people need and want and how to go about doing that. And so there have been some really pretty powerful sessions where there have been, you know, larger groups of employees, and you know, the company's kind of divided into zones, so we can do this by zone. And so, you know, hundreds of people will sign on to a session. For example, there will be an educational component, or most recently, there was a really powerful set of interviews with African-American colleagues who volunteered to kind of give their perspective, and they kind of interviewed each other. And so there was time given for everyone who participated in the session to watch those interviews. And then immediately after, there were facilitated breakout sessions with no more than 10 people. Which got very emotional. There were tears in many of them. Lots of really personal stories exchanged by a diverse array of employees, and they're continuing. Marsh is going to continue to do this as well. And so there's you know, I'm part of some of those discussions, and it's been a really interesting process because there's an awareness that yes, we need to create a space for everyone to listen and everyone to share their experience. And now, you know, you're at that point where you're like, okay, you know, there are some people that are like, okay, let's solve it now. How do we solve it? You know, then there's others that are like, I don't think we're done listening, you know? And so it's just been a very, very, very thoughtful process. And I'm really impressed with, like I said, I've only been with Marsh for about 3 months, and I'm hugely impressed with how they're kind of tackling this, because it's slow, it's thought out, it's incredibly thoughtful. And trying to get perspectives of everybody involved is really key.
Great.
I can jump in, Catherine. Just similar to maybe some of the things that Liz had talked about, at Zurich, we've done some town halls. We have a number of employee resource groups, and our African American Alliance is very active, and we look to them to say, please help us. What else should we and could we be doing to support our employees, and then to help people better understand how people are feeling. So we also hosted a number of listening sessions. One of the sessions that we did that was quite powerful is we had a number of our Black colleagues share their stories, and we had a clinical psychologist facilitate the discussion, just recognizing it was really sensitive and it was raw and just very, very different from what we've done or shared in the workplace in the past. And in North America, we have about 9,000 employees, and we had about 3,500 dialed in and joined in live. And we had our leaders, some of our senior leaders, open and close the session. And I have to say, it just, the feedback that we got, a lot of people just felt like their eyes were open to things that they hadn't been able to see before. So we've really approached this as listening and then taking action. And there's been a number of things that we've done over the years around diversity and inclusion, but this was I'll say a catalyst for us to take a look and say, what else do we need to be doing more of? And it's interesting, being an insurance company, not surprisingly, we are very risk averse at times. We'll support our customers in terms of taking on their risk, but as a company, we don't lean into things oftentimes. And one thing that we weren't very good at was being transparent about where are we at. So something that we have done is shared externally what we're calling a belief statement. And we have added in terms of diversity and inclusion, we're also being very clear about we've got more work to do around equity. And then we want to have a sense of belonging. And then we need to do more around transparency and accountability. So we have shared our representation in terms of race and ethnicity. And, if you take a look at it, we clearly have work to do. So that was one first step. We just launched the last week anti-racism training for our senior leaders. So it's a group, our leadership team is about 125, and we have them in groups of 8 to 10, meeting weekly and having study group discussions. So people are really encouraged, I think, and excited about that because they feel like, I need some help with this. And we've done a number of things with our managers too, because people are really feeling like these are conversations I'm not comfortable with and I need some help. So we have hosted manager discussions or manager support sessions, I'll say, to really equip managers a bit better. And then finally, one of the last things that we did is we established a diversity and inclusion council, and our CEO is chairing that. And then we've brought in external partners. So we have a customer and one of our brokers, some of our community partners, and so they can challenge us and give us that outside in view of, are we pushing hard enough? Is there something else that we could or should be doing? So we just met last week and just really jazzed about where we're headed, and we know that we've got quite a bit of work to do.
Excellent. Thank you. It sounds like you're both doing some really good things. And when we think about listening, and Tracy, you alluded to this a little bit earlier, that there's an increasing conversation around empathy and well-being in the workplace for very good reason. And what are the different generations expecting or asking for in relation to this? And then what are you doing to address it?
It's interesting. I think I'll just say with empathy, and I know someone had mentioned this earlier, but maybe it was Diane just saying, some of this human, softer stuff, it wasn't, while we were talking about it, not everybody was fully embracing the need to be empathetic and listen. And I think, again, the silver lining here from COVID is that it's really emphasized the need to tune in and really listen and understand empathetically with what's going on with people. And I think, again, for the different generations, people have different challenges. Again, I mentioned earlier about, if you've got children at home, that's really, you know, you might have a different level of stress than maybe you don't have children at home, but you're concerned and you're trying to manage from afar and help your parents, your elderly parents. So, you know, a lot of what we have really been encouraging managers to do is, again, just, you know, let's not get right into the discussion about work. Take a few minutes and see how people are. Because if they're not, you know, if they're not feeling supported, they're not going to be their best selves. It's interesting. One thing that I'll say, sometimes there's clues too. You know, we have a culture where we're utilizing teams, and people are, they're really overloaded, I think, with teams. And there's a feeling of, gee, I've got to be on video or I'm not participating. And I think similar to what Diane, you were saying is, you know, we're looking at some norms because we don't want to have people feel like, you know, the only way to participate is to be on video. But sometimes that video does help, that you can get some body language and understand, you know, what's going on with someone if you know them. If they're not participating on the video too, it's also a clue for the manager to say, hey, wait a second, you know, is everything okay? So those are the types of conversations that we're really trying to encourage. And it's been interesting, some of the feedback that we've gotten from the various surveys and listening sessions that we've done. We've had very strong, we had a huge increase in our employee net promoter score. We went from a 23 to a 58, which is, I mean, we were just shocked. But what's coming through is people feel cared for, supported, and it matters. It matters to their experience, and they absolutely want us to continue with that. Now the challenge will be, you know, once we get out of this, I'll say, crisis mode and get into some kind of normal, how do we continue and have that be sustainable the way, you know, the way that we're managing and working with one another?
Awesome. Thank you, Tracy.
Yeah, I can hop in. I really echo much of what Tracy just said. You know, I think there's been a real focus on getting to know the whole person, you know, and I think there's a lot of discussion about, you know, on Zoom calls, you know, like people's kids and pets, and, you know, you can see all that in the background. And I think that we've taken steps to kind of magnify that a little bit. There's definitely, similar to what Tracy said, you know, manager conversations are much more personal without prying, you know, stopping and listening and for the full answer and interacting, you know, based on that answer, not how you doing, fine, great, moving on. But I think, you know, we've done some things around video compilations with different groups, sometimes full, you know, company-wide, sometimes, you know, in zones or practice areas. And there'll be different themes, like show us what your summer looked like in, you know, in 10 seconds or less or something. And then the marketing department will spend time putting music behind these videos and compiling them and editing them. And it's been something that I don't think pre-pandemic anyone would have ever necessarily focused on and spent so much time and investment in. But everybody loves them. You know, people actually watch them. They click, they watch through. You know, it's shown on the CEO's call, you know, the periodic calls with the entire company. And so there's just a whole new focus on getting to know all aspects of people, which I think couldn't come at a better time. You know, as from a civil unrest, from politics, you know, I think a common theme is trying to break away from this idea that people are monolithic, you know, like where everyone is different, and it probably holds just as true from a generational perspective as well. You know, like it's we're of a generation and a race and a gender and a family status and et cetera. And so it kind of shades everything. And I think bringing as much of you into the workplace as possible and making you feel comfortable doing that is paramount right now, you know, especially in a time of everything being virtual. But as Tracy said again, and also I really like hearing that I think a lot of companies are trying to figure out how do we keep the best of what we're experiencing now and move forward, you know, so kind of a better by design kind of thought process.
Well, and as a boomer, you know, things have changed and evolved in such exponential ways, because to listen to Liz and Tracy talk about bringing your whole self to work and learning more about people's personal lives, that's not how boomers were raised. I mean, boomers were raised to, put on that certain, your game face. You show up with your game face at work. You are not inherently vulnerable. You keep your needs to yourself. You don't want to be seen as someone who needs anything extra or extra care. So this is one of those cultural, generational clashes that we are working with. And the boomers are trying really hard to understand that millennials will talk about things that a boomer would never dream about talking about. And I think these are all part of the learning and understanding that we all have to work extra hard to be flexible and appreciative of the backgrounds from which we come, because it is really not part of the boomers' experience to talk about your personal life really in the workplace. So we're gaining ground on it, but it's going to be a longer road.
I'll share a really quick story. We had one of the challenges that I think that many organizations are facing is when you have something to celebrate, now it's in a virtual environment. So how do you make the most of these fantastic awards that people win, over time? Mm-hmm. And we had one of our highest awards that we call the Excellence Award. We had a number of employees win it, and one of the managers that I work with closely is a boomer. And he was trying to figure out what's a way to make it special. And so someone on his team said, well, why don't you call Sue's, why don't you connect with Sue's family and invite them into the celebration and have it be a surprise? And he's like, no, I don't, I'm not sure. I don't think that'll be a good idea. And, kudos to him, because he was convinced. He said, all right, I'll try it and see how it goes. And it was fantastic. This woman that won the award, her husband and her 2 kids came in, and she was just, first of all, so surprised, but it was so meaningful for her, is what she shared later about, having her family be part of it, especially given everything going on right now, and she's trying to balance things. So it was an interesting, I'll say, learning for this manager too, because he said, I guess I wouldn't have been so comfortable with that, but I think it worked out fantastic. So I just thought it was such a neat situation. And it's something now that we're saying to other managers, hey, if you're going to do something to celebrate, might be something that you might want to consider. So, but everybody is, the comfort level and what they think could be meaningful and exciting for people is really different.
Kiki, did you want to add anything to that one?
I just echo what everyone said about how important it is for managers to really express empathy and vulnerability. One of the webinars that we've created for our leadership is around how to manage high-performing virtual teams, and we go in a lot about vulnerability. And it was interesting when we were speaking with different cultures. When we said the word vulnerability, they were like, oh no, in our culture that means you could be hurt or sick. And so it's been having to teach them about that has been good. But we're trying to coach our managers that instead of having a one-on-one, and I think Tracy mentioned it, instead of having a one-on-one focused on business, focus the entire one-on-one just on how someone is. And we've seen all of our managers across the board really adopted this with their one-on-ones with their employees. Really, that's a time to check in personally. I've seen that just in the one-on-ones that I have with my manager and some other people that I kind of dotted line report to. They've completely shifted. Before, when we were in the office, we would have an agenda and I had all of my things ticked down and I have to update on this project and this project. And then COVID happened and we were at home. And I remember the first one-on-one I had, I didn't have an agenda. I was like, oh my God, what am I going to update her on? And we just sat and talked, and she laughed about my crock pot, because my crock pot was always behind me in my old apartment. And that became she would check in on me. And when she would check in on me, she'd say, where's that crock pot today? Because I would move my laptop around my apartment. But I think coaching managers to be empathetic, and our CEO has been absolutely fantastic throughout this entire. He's just a really wonderful guy, and I can't echo. I really enjoy working with him. And throughout this entire thing through COVID, we have people working on the manufacturing lines, and every day I'm so eternally grateful to these employees that go in and day out into our manufacturing plants, and they go in and they make the batteries, and I'm allowed to work from my apartment in Chicago because they're out there making sure that there's product on the shelf. And we've been incredibly grateful and thankful to our employees in our manufacturing. And one of our managers who oversees that whole sector of our organization had this like brilliant idea to create like a video. And so we compiled, I compiled all these different videos from employees around the globe, and his son like composed music, and we posted and sent it to all of our plants. And just that simple gratitude to them, just it's gone leaps and bounds. And just the importance that our CEO has throughout this entire pandemic and everything, the importance that he's stressed on the health and well-being of our folks at home, but also our folks in the manufacturing lines. Like I've seen the engagement go sky high, and it's been a really wild ride, but it's been really great because it, again, like as a millennial, I want to work for an organization that truly does care about like the heart and soul of their employees and cares about them personally. And at Duracell, I know that they do. And whenever I have ideas, I'm like, we should create this sort of resource page, and we should do this sort of webinar to make sure our employees are like mentally doing okay. They're always like, yes, let's do it. So it's been great. It's very important.
Excellent, thank you. So before we go to our Q&A, I have one more question for you all, and we've got so far like 5 questions in the Q&A, so we've got some good responses. When it comes to the future of work, we know employee expectations are changing, right? This kind of crisis mode has changed things. So what are you and your company prioritizing moving forward? And how do you think this will impact the different generations?
So for Marmon, we're prioritizing employee safety and comfort, so it really, and as Kiki was saying, we too are very grateful for our manufacturing frontline employees who have been showing up throughout this crisis, while everyone else who can work at home has been asked to work from home this entire time. And so we are trying to balance safety and comfort of our employees as trumping everything else. Sorry, I keep using that word. Must be the season. Anyway, that's our first priority is safety and comfort. And as we think about, what we are planning to do going forward, I can say that Marmon is not, for a majority of its office locations, I don't think that we will be going back to a situation where we will require people to work on site 100% of the time. We've proven the case. People are accustomed to it. They've seen that it works. And so we're trying to balance all of that with the needs of our manufacturing units, that obviously there are some roles that have to be on site and working full time on site. And so those are some of the, the more sticky issues that we're trying to work through. But for us, the safety and comfort of our employees is number one.
I'll say that it's similarly, the safety is number one. As we've looked at future of work, and I'll say just trying to really look out, a bit further into the future. One thing that we've been talking about is the need, we know with technology and everything, the way the world is changing, customer expectations, that we're going to need different skills. And, what are they? How are we going to get there? It's interesting with COVID, one of the things that has occurred is there's parts of our business where the workload has picked up considerably, and other parts of the organization where the workload, they've got time on their hands. So one thing that we've done is establish what we're calling a talent marketplace, and looking to match our talent. We're, one of the things we've talked about is we want to protect our core, and one of the things that's core to us is our people. So, in many cases now we have people that they might be, in, I'll say the claims organization, and now they've stepped into an operations role, and it could be a rotation or it could be something more permanent, but there's some support there to either upskill or to reskill them, because we feel that, they're an important part of the organization, and how do we make sure that the talent that we have is put, put to use is probably not the best way to say it, but it's been very positive. I think we've got more, we just have started some of this, and they're really viewed as more of rotational assignments at the moment. But we really, what's starting to happen now is we're saying, how do we start to break down jobs into certain tasks, and what are the skills, and how can you go and look at a particular opportunity and gain some skills? And, the belief is that's really going to change the way we view jobs and everything as we go forward. It's also playing into where, when we start going back into the office, what's required to be in the office as an example, and not. So we're just embarking on some of that right now.
Okay. All right, so now we have about 6 minutes. And so we have a few questions that I'll throw out to the panelists. My firm works with a number of family-owned manufacturing companies without independent directors on their board. And I find myself often advocating for cultural shifting towards remote working and flexible workforce to bridge some of the gaps they face to continue growing. Any advice on how to influence these old school family owners?
Well, I feel like, Marmon has grown by acquisition, and it has been basically family-owned companies that Marmon has acquired over the course of its 67 years. And, so I'm familiar with that kind of a culture. And I think the most compelling argument that we have been able to make is really just talking about the reality that millennials today make up 50% of the workforce, and by 2025 will be 75% of the workforce. And if you want, it becomes an issue of supply and demand. If you want to attract top talent and have the best people working for you, you have to be able to offer an attractive employee value proposition, period, end of story, game over. And that has been the most compelling argument to get the attention of people who are loath to change in these dearly held values to which they clutch, particularly when all around them is so uncertain. It seems like people get a white knuckle grip upon the things that have helped them become successful, but those same things are not going to contribute to their success in the future.
I would only add to that. I think that was perfectly said, and I would add that not only will it help kind of attract people, eventually, or retain people eventually by having these flexible kind of arrangements, but I would put it, if you have a star player who just isn't geographically convenient to you, like, don't you still want them? Like, I mean, you like, why would you say, no, I want the person who's only, 30 miles away from me instead of someone who's, across the country, if the person across the country is going to be an amazing employee, an amazing asset to your firm. The only way to get them, if they're unwilling to move, is to allow this remote environment, and that's how you can kind of staff your firm with the very best and brightest to take you into the future.
I just wanted to add one more thing to Liz and Diane, that was very well said. When we think about retaining top talent, especially female top talent for diversity, a lot of the times, like, the females are at home right now, they're being librarian, teacher, lunch lady. And so organizations have to adapt, and they have to develop these flexible work arrangements and develop these cultures, because they're going to lose really great minds. And we want to make sure that the wage gap and the gap that just because we're female at home taking care of kids and family, it doesn't widen during this time. We want to close it. So I think that that's a really important thing to bring. I'm off my soapbox now.
The only last thing that I would just add is I think it's really healthy to engage, in this case with the family-owned, whoever the family is, if they have they're holding some beliefs, it's engaging some discussion with them about why, why do you think that someone can't work outside of the office? And, is it Is it about trust? Because if there are principles in place around, it's all about results and it's clear about how to get results. It's, about having trust and confidence, communicating, then I think just to be successful, it's important to understand that why so that you can be successful. That's certainly been a learning for us as we implemented flex work, a few years back.
And do any of you see work from home as a long-term trend, or do you see yourselves eventually coming back, asking employees to come back to the office?
For us, Catherine, I think it's going to be a long-term trend. And the people, where a job can be physically performed remotely, I think in almost every one of those cases, it's going to be allowed to work remotely. And we're always going to have those people who, for various reasons, prefer to come to the office every day. Their home situation may not be given to a work from home setting. But it's really going to be employee choice, assuming that the job physically can be done remotely.
All right, and then just to wrap up, is there anything else that any of you want to add?
I guess I just want to encourage people to ask the questions. I know that there are still some of our leaders who are they are afraid to ask certain questions because they're afraid of the answer. And I always try to tell them, well, you're still in control of the decision. Just because they might tell you something that you don't want to hear doesn't mean that you are then forced into a corner to capitulate to the request. People really just want to have a voice to be heard, whether they're a boomer, an Xer, a millennial, a Z, whatever. People just want to have a voice, and just giving them that opportunity is huge. So I encourage people to just ask.
And just building on that, I think just the asking, and I know, Diane, you absolutely implied it, the listening. And people can tell, though, if you're not listening and being authentic and just really listening to understand. And truly, we talked about empathy, but that matters. Whether it be interactions with your people, they're going to benefit, you'll benefit as an organization with an empathetic approach. You'll learn something that will inform you. Could be interactions with your customers, communities, whatever it might be. But I think listening and really listening empathetically, which is different than just asking the question and just waiting for the answer and moving on. So that would be my 2 cents.
And I would add to that something I mentioned earlier, is that remember in all of this that people are not monolithic. And then I think I'm disturbed so often kind of what's happening in the state of the country and how separate we are. When we're a whole lot more similar than we are different. And I think conversations like this one, we're pointing out generational differences, and there's racial differences, and there's gender differences. And I think they're really great conversations to have to gain a better understanding. But you always have to keep that lens that is not like the Bible for whoever is sitting in front of you. That person is a combination of so many different things. And we should always try to figure out how we're all similar first, how this person is a combination of a lot of different feelings and beliefs and experiences, and then reaching that person from a personal or from a work perspective.
All right, well, thank you so much to our panelists for your incredible wisdom and insight. And I'm sure that everyone can walk away with a nugget today. I mean, that was just full. Thank you so much. And thank you to Loyola for hosting this. And Harry, we'll turn it back over to you.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. Some great information. The 5 generations in the workforce was an interesting challenge even before all this, but now it's even more so. So appreciate your insight very much with that. That brings us to the conclusion of our program today. And I want to say a special thank you to all of our speakers, our sponsors, and our team within Loyola that has put the program together. We couldn't have done it without you. Please give us your feedback through the mobile app or send me a note. We want to do whatever we can to make this better in the future. And we hope that today has been a good a good experience for you, and that you've come away with a couple of things that you can do to make your operation better, and maybe to go back to what Cheryl had mentioned, what we can do to make a difference in the world. So anyway, with that, please stay safe and take care, and have a great day. Thank you.